Um, so the first topic today is going to be about family structure and the impacts that different family structures have on children's ongoing development. It's important to remember that families are a system, and what happens to any member of that system can have an impact on every other member of the system. And you can break up that family system into smaller subsystems that comprise the family. So dyads or pairs of individuals, but also polyadic or multiple member groups. So for example, when a young couple has a baby, they bring that baby home, their system goes from two to three, and now every member in that system has an impact on the infant, and the infant also has an impact on both the mother and the father. So the child can have an impact on the quality of the relationship in a marriage, for example, or the quality of the parenting, and the parenting can have an impact on the child's behavior. This is from our last census, which was 10 years ago. It's about time that soon we should have some new data from another census. But at that time, there were about 67% of the households in the US did not have children. So about a third did. The largest group of those were married couples. That may not have been the biological parents or both of them, but they were a married couple. There were about 7% single parent homes, uh, and it breaks down into smaller groups. So, one of the impacts on family structure is divorce, and it's important for us when we think about the how divorce can have an impact on children to remember it's not just one day, it's not just that one court order. There was a series of events that went into this divorce. So there's been probably stress and conflict and change in where people live and where the child lives and in the child's day-to-day routine. There's probably be oftentimes a change in financial status, uh, as parents, as a child goes from living in a family where maybe two people were working to where there's not. So all of these things can have an impact on the child as well as the change in family structure. Now, typically, most children have some negative impact from a divorce. Now, there the amount of impact can vary from child to child depending on some child characteristics and the overall atmosphere around the divorce. Uh, but some things that we see, and the effect sizes here are generally small, so these aren't generally major impacts. One is there's a greater risk of insecure attachment. We see higher rates of acting out sorts of behavior like aggression, and as children get older, experimenting with drugs, uh, those kind of delinquent behaviors in teen parenthood also, but also internalizing disorders such as depression or anxiety, uh, increased rates of medical problems, increased academic problems, and a heightened risk of even adult relationship problems later on. And again, these effect sizes are generally small, but they're consistent across a large group of people. So you see it across the board. The most important factor in predicting how children do following a divorce is the quality of the parenting and how uh, the quality of that relationship between the parents and the child. Um, there are also some child outcomes linked to single parent homes and step families. These outcomes are also small. They're similar to a pattern as those with divorce, uh, but there's some indication that children in single families or step families experience that risk when they have other risk factors present, such as a lot of negative family interactions or a mother who's suffering from depression that can exacerbate the risk of that family structure. So, children who are in blended families or step families, how will they adjust to that change is linked to the quality of the marital relationship between the husband and the wife. Authoritative parenting, more warmth in the parenting and less negativity, less conflict, less coercion. Those are linked to more positive outcomes for children in blended families. However, it can take a while. For many young children, it can take as much as 2 to 3 years to adjust to to their life in a blended family. And remember too that uh, the contextual experiences can be quite complex for many children if both their biological mother and biological father remarry, and all of a sudden we can have a family where I'm with this family 4 days a week and my other family 3 days a week, and I have a stepbrother here and a stepsister there, but they might stay with their biological parents, and so it can be there's no single recipe for what that family structure looks like. It can be quite complex and different. A pretty large group in the U.S. is that group of single parent families. It's largely single mothers with a smaller group of single fathers. But when you combine those two groups, it's over a third of families are headed by a single parent. Uh, Also remember that we're not necessarily talking about young mothers or teen mothers. Uh, in fact, the largest growing or the fastest growing group of single parents are unmarried mothers who are later in life and they are employed and college educated. Um, but when we do see a teen mother there, that's a situation where there can be sort of compounding of stress because the young teen mother is working on her own uh, education, her own establishment of her own identity, and working through a lot of her own developmental issues. Uh, and so those mothers are particularly face challenges, uh, and they'll also face economic challenges too. They're more likely to be in poverty and have higher levels of stress. Outcomes for children in single parent families when stress levels are low, they're comparable to parents in two parent homes. But when stress levels are higher, we see outcomes that are more like children from homes that have experienced a divorce. So when we think about just that group of teenage mothers, we see that children, and remember that's a situation where we see a particular mix of of stress and increased risk of economic difficulties. But those children statistically are at increased risk for behavior problems, for substance abuse, to have an IEP, to be retained in grade, to drop out of school. They show lower achievement test scores. They're more likely to be a teen parent themselves. And infants are more likely to be born premature and to have medical needs and to be low birth weight. A part of that is because uh, teen mothers may not be receiving adequate prenatal medical care because they may have tried to hide the pregnancy early on and those kinds of things. Um, so statistically, and you've got to remember when we're talking about statistics, we're not talking about any given individual or any given child. We can't ever look at one child and say, oh, this child has a single mom, or oh, this child had this life experience, and so they're at greater risk. We're talking about uh, a pool, a population. So those rates are a little higher among this group and that group, but we can never look to an individual. But when we think about those groups, the question becomes, why do children in those intact nuclear families as a group, why are they having uh, more likely to have more positive outcomes? And one of the reasons is that intact families are more likely to have higher parent educational levels. Those children are more likely to stay in one space and not move as frequently. We see higher levels of closeness between the parent and child. There's less financial strain, and economics can bring such stress. There's lower rates of abuse, and just having the father presence there can be a positive factor. Overall, there's less levels of conflict, and if you think about it, that makes sense that there's likely conflict leading to a divorce, and better overall qualities of parenting are observed. Another aspect of family structures are parents' work schedules, and especially considering two parent working homes versus one parent working home. And this will come up again when we discuss childcare. But most research, many have found that there's really no negative overall impact from maternal employment, but there is a risk of problems if the stress from parents' work spills over and it becomes more stressful at home. And there is some research that shows there may be some concerns the earlier that mothers work. So, especially if mothers are working when their infants are very young, especially if it's a lot of hours and a stressful job, that does seem to have the potential for some negative impact there. Another aspect of family structure are children who are living in same-sex couples. Today, about a third of men and about a fifth of women in same-sex couples are rearing at least one child. The majority of those children are those individuals' biological children. They're not adopted. Uh, there's nothing about being gay that takes away your biological ability to make a child. If and many individuals have their own biological children. Children in gay and lesbian families develop in much the same way that other children still. There's never been any indication that things like sexual orientation is predicts an individual's the quality of parenting in a given home. There are three myths that we sometimes hear in our society that are not supported by research. One is that there are more negative outcomes for children who grow up in gay and lesbian households, and that's not the case. Another is the concern that children will have other children make fun of them, and so they're more likely to be bullied. And there's no indicators that that's the case. And there's no support to the idea that children who have gay parents are more likely to grow up to be gay themselves. It just doesn't work that way. Um, Another aspect of family structure are children who live with grandparents, and that's about 10% of the children in the US who live in a home where the grandparent is present. But there's a whole diverse group there of what that can look like. So sometimes that means that this is a child who has a teen mother, and mom and teen mother and child are living at home with her parents, and there's this multi-level, multi-generational kind of parenting going on. And other times it means that the child lives just with the grandparents, and the grandparents either have legal custody or they in de facto have custody of the child. The parent might be off serving a military duty, or they may be incarcerated, or they may have a substance abuse problem. There's a number of reasons why children are with custodial grandparents. They may be in a situation where, especially when we look at times where there's a lot of social and economic duress, a mother or a mother and father lose a job or lose a home, and they move back in with the parents with the whole family. Or another form that this can take place is a family, either a single parent or a married parents or cohabitating parents are taking care of an older relative in their home. So there's a variety of different ways there. And in general, having a grandparent and having that kind of close connection to a grandparent can be a very positive experience for children in terms of sharing those kind of intergenerational connections, and sometimes having an extra person to provide care and resources. We are particularly concerned, though, when you mix some of those demographic lines, and especially when we recognize that the largest group of custodial grandparents have additional stressors in their lives. The largest group is likely to be living in poverty themselves. They're likely not to have access to health insurance. The single most likely demographic candidate to be a custodial grandparent are female African Americans who do not have a high school degree. So they're facing challenges in themselves, and they're living often more likely to live in poverty. So that's a particularly fragile group uh, that has some challenges and some stressors that we need to be aware of and thoughtful about. And that is where I want to stop for this talk.